our family is grateful for your presence here today. Ric touched each of our lives, either through his love, his friendship, or his surgical gifts. This is a day to celebrate Ric, but it's also a time for me to give thanks. I would like to acknowledge the unconditional love and support I have received from my family and our friends as we navigated Ric's Alzheimer's journey. Whether it was a text asking how we were, to a dinner left for us, to a hug and a visit, Ric and I never felt alone. I cherish and gain strength at all the outpouring of love and support that continues to come my way. To my daughters, Marissa, Amanda, and Natalia, you have been my pillars of strength. Out of such sadness, a bond has been created that keeps me upright. We chose this date, June 14th, because it marks the 65th anniversary of Ric's family escaping Cuba and coming to the United States. When our daughters were growing up, we celebrated this Flag Day with a huge Cuban meal, often with his mother and father joining us. Ric was so proud to be an American and to live the American dream, but he was even prouder to be Cuban. Our family traveled to Cuba in 2024 and witnessed firsthand the Cuban spirit. There was laughter, there was friendly help, and there was always music. Embedded in the Cuban genes is the quality of perseverance. This is the quality our daughters have inherited from Ric and is the backbone of our family. And this Izquierdo perseverance will continue to lead us. We chose to have this celebration in this church, Alice Millar. Almost 46 years ago, Ric and I stood in this exact spot and exchanged our wedding vows. Often on our anniversaries, we would come to Evanston and marvel at how our life as a couple began here at Northwestern. Thanks to a dear friend who encouraged me, maybe badgered me, to come out on a Wednesday night to an ATO party back in 1977, that is when our romance began. First we were friends, then an item, and then soulmates. He was an easy man to love. He was my best friend to the end. And to those of you who came to our wedding, no worries. I'll not ask you to drive to the barn in Barrington. Today the reception is just a short walk from here. Speaking of that ATO party, there are a dozen brothers that have maintained contact with each other over the last 50 years. They are here today from all over the country. They continued to include Ric in their get-togethers, whether it was going to Wildcat football games, to watching March Madness, to inviting us for dinner, or to just calling or stopping by to see us. They always treated Izzy, as they called him, as just one of the bros. They continue to reach out to me even now and offer me such comfort that I will be forever grateful. As I prepared for this celebration, I wanted to share what I believe is the essence of Ric. He was humble. He was honest. His family meant the world to him. Not only our daughters, but the extended Cuban family that became my family. I have learned Cubans are quick to laugh, quick to put their arms around you. Whenever we gathered with his siblings or his aunts or uncles or cousins, it was always a time of celebration. I've been going through boxes of Ric's treasures. Much like his father, and very much unlike me, he saved everything. I came across his scrapbooks from high school that his mother had compiled. She had every photo, every newspaper article, every award given to Ric during his time in Tuscola. He was a gifted athlete and scholar. Then I came across his surgical cases he had cataloged for his oral plastic surgery boards. There were photos of his patients who had suffered the most horrific injuries. How could anyone put these people back together again? And yet he did. All these years of being married to Ric, he never boasted or complained about his work. He would just say, "I'm just doing what I love." He loved the practice of medicine and never thought of it as a job. It was his calling. And that's the essence of Ric: humble, honest, not wanting special attention. He just wanted to help people. As you know, music soothed his soul, especially the Grateful Dead. That's been the music you heard upon entering the church, played by Amanda's piano teacher, Renee Nazier. He passed his love of the Dead on to me, to his daughters, and now to his grandsons. Our cats are even named after the Dead. Remember Ric with a smile when you hear one of their songs. As Jerry Garcia sang in the song Ripple, "Would you hear my voice come through the music?" And so, may we remember what was important to Ric. Be honest, enjoy music, persevere, and be there for others.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful seeing loving friends and family here to share Ric's legacy. My name is Mercy. I am Ric's sister. Some people call me Mercedes, Merce, Abuelita, Abba, Mami, and Mercitin. But I love it when people refer to me as Ric's sister. And though Ric also went by very many different names: Ricardo, Ric, Ricky, Dr. Izquierdo, Izzy, to me, he will always be my big brother, Ricardito. Ric really was generous and very kind, brave, unwavering in his devotion to all of us. He had a way of addressing the world with grace and resilience. Ric and I never shared crosswords. I'm going to be 68 this year, never once. Not because I was an easy sister, because he was extraordinarily patient and generous, and yes, even as a child. He had plenty of opportunities to tell on me, as he got me out of a lot of scrapes. Through our entire history, he indulged my every whim. And as a bonus, I had the profound privilege of calling him my friend as an adult. As Pam mentioned, today is a very special day for the Izquierdo family. 65 years ago, my parents, Ric and I, boarded a Pan Am flight at Terminal 1 at the airport in Havana and headed towards Miami. This 75-minute flight changed the course of our lives. Apprehensive and unsure of the future, Ricardo and Big Mercy engaged in and navigated an odyssey shaping our family history. From 1961 until 1968, the Izquierdos relocated 6 times: Havana, Miami, Blairsville, Erie, Cleveland, Charleston, and finally Tuscola, Illinois. Despite the upheaval of moving often, Ric was steady. He adapted, persevered, succeeded, all right, but while retaining a strong sense of self. Looking back, I've thought about this a lot. What an exceptional child he was. No surprise that he was an exceptional adult. During those years, for the most part, we lived in not-so-nice neighborhoods, and Ric was my only companion. His love, humor, and strength shielded me from the feelings of fear and instability. As you can imagine, I have countless memories of those years together, but I would like to share a few of them with you, if you indulge me. They're small moments, many seem inconsequential, but I hold them dear, and thinking about our lives together brings me intense joy and peace. Torrance State Hospital for the Mentally Ill in rural Pennsylvania was our first home. Our only neighbors were the staff and patients at the hospital. You know, it was scary. A couple of times I can remember the alarm sounding, and we would have to run back into the house until the all clear was given. But I also recall the day during that time that Ric, not knowing how to speak a word of English, set off to attend his first day of first grade. No anger, no tears, just resolute. He set a high bar for resilience and tenacity. Our cousins of Arcarzes came to visit us during our time in Erie, 1963. The area had experienced back-to-back snowstorms, and Santa brought Ric a flexible flyer sled. I don't know if you remember those, but they were not flexible. Ric and our cousins, Pepe and Pancho, spent hours sledding, hours. But in typical Ric fashion, he included me in the big boy group, sledding and laughing, and later laughing into the night, as all of us squeezed in one bedroom, and our parents had to come in several times trying to shut us up. Ric laughing and reveling in the bond with our cousins. In Cleveland, we did not go to the same school. Yet, he walked me to kindergarten each and every day. And yes, he held my hand. He didn't have to. He just did. Later after school, he often had me sit with him on the fire escape. I wasn't allowed to go out there by myself. So overlooking the cobblestone alley, he would tease, and not mean tease. Ric was not mean. He'd funny tease and tell me jokes and stories about his school day. Our younger brother, Ignacio, arrived while we lived in Charleston, West Virginia. Ric constantly played with him. He also loved making up silly songs. Standing in front of Ignacio's crib, Ric sang and tickled, and Ignacio jumped and screeched with delight. But in Charleston, I'll never forget putting up our first Christmas tree. Ric was elated. He went with my dad to Kresge's to buy it. Later in the evening, he helped put it together, and then we all decorated it. He was so proud. Then we sat next to the tree on the floor and played cards. We played war, because that's the only thing I knew how to play. And eventually, the excitement was too much for us. We fell asleep right there on the floor next to the tree. That was magic. Sitting squished in the back of a 1967 maroon Mercury Comet, Ric held our parakeet's cage the entire time from Charleston to what would be our true home in Tuscola. He never once complained. He initiated car games and embraced the adventure. We settled in our first house on Main Street in Tuscola, and Ric made friends immediately, excelled at sports and academics. And to me, then he became even larger than life. Did you know he never left me behind? He still came in my room to gossip about the day, or took me with him to Four Seasons, the local department store, to look at all the newly released albums. And now as a teen, he even let me hang out when his much cooler upperclassmen friends came over. It was then that I was happily and gratefully dubbed Ric's sister by our new adopted community. And I am so very lucky to continue to be his sister. And in my heart, he is still my Ricardito.
What a long, strange trip. Good afternoon. Most of you know me as Ignacio. I'm the younger brother. Some of you know me as Ignacito. Some of you know me as Nader. I go by Nate now, and I actually have Rick to thank for the Nader piece. The songs that Mercy talked about were, one of them was directed specifically at me. He'd bounce around, I don't remember, I have to go by your memory. He'd bounce around in front of me singing Nader, Nader, Bader, Alligator, anything that rhymed with Nader. Much to my parents' displeasure, I've had that name for 50, some 60 years. And I welcome it every day. I have that memory. I'm not certain how I'm going to get through this, but I will. We're going to take a sad song and make it better today. I'd like to first thank Pamela and the girls for putting this pachanga together. Pam, I've watched you over the years, your patience, your grace, your humility, and allowing me to speak today. Thank you. It's been an inspiration. Marissa, the planner, the organizer, you managed to keep things rolling in the right direction. Amanda, you've been the quiet, stoic one. I've watched you become your mom's sidekick. And you've opened up in ways that I've never seen. Natalia, following in your dad's footsteps and Ella's footsteps, my goodness. That's amazing. You always gave an account where your dad was at. Each of you had your role, each of you drew strength from each other, and you're going to keep doing that. I'd also like to extend my extended family that traveled here long and far. Very much appreciated. Such a long time to be gone, long time to be gone, and a short time to be there. I have so much I'd like to say about Ric, not enough time today. So I'd like to share some of the memories that I have, personal memories, that most of you probably are not aware of, but I hope to never forget, and I'll pass them down to my children. I don't need to mention how proud Ric was of his Spanish and Cuban heritage, or how he lived his life in a manner to honor our parents. Those go without saying. I don't need to mention, as Mercy mentioned also, the 7 or 8 locations that he lived during those young formative years, through 1961 to 1968. And I don't need to mention his love of music, the Beatles first, and then later the Dead, and how he turned me on. He gave me a cassette tape with Europe 72. And I listened to that. I still have it. I almost brought it, but I didn't. I listened to that nonstop. I also remember him teaching himself guitar, the basement while going to med school, or the piano lessons on Western Avenue. I'm the youngest, 10 years younger than Ric, 7 years younger than Mercy. And as far as I'm concerned, they each hung the moon. Growing up with Ric as a big brother, he set the bar extremely high. He set the example we try to live by, and I strive to be like Ric. I hope to continue to live by his example, and hopefully our kids will also. Ric was present in the moment, patient, and an easy demeanor that transcended to everybody around him. I have no clue where that came from, because growing up in the Izquierdo house was far from calm. Our family moved to Tuscola in the summer of '67, and my earliest memory is of Rick. Very first memory that I have is of Rick. We were in the kitchen in Main Street. I was probably a little over 2 years old. And that house had a basement, and it was an older house. And I'm certain Mercy was right next to him. And they told me there were monsters in the basement. Way to scare a 2-year-old, guys. Rick and I shared a room. We moved to our home of 25 years plus. And I think we moved in the day after my sister's 11th birthday, 1968. We shared a room on El Dorado Drive. El Dorado Drive for the Izquierdos. I'm sure Mom and Dad had something to do with that. Twin beds side by side, one shared closet, built-in shelving, separate desks, corkboard on the wall with various items tacked up, mostly of his track ribbons and clippings. While he played several sports in high school, growing up, track was his strength. He was part of many local track records, both in middle school and high school. There was even a clipping for when he was on the Northwestern indoor team. His freshman year, he broke a long-standing Big Ten medley relay event. I wish I had that. I also have memories of Rick coming into our room late at night. I wasn't more than 4, 5, 6 years old. And he said, "Let's go wake up Mercy." And that meant bolting into her room in the dead of night and start jumping on her bed until she screamed. Then we'd run back to our rooms and act like we were asleep, and we'd say, "Who, us?" What many of you deadheads out there may not know, the Izquierdos had their own version of Europe 72. Flying was still a romantic novelty at that time. We flew over on a Boeing 747, and I don't know for what reason my folks let me go on my own, but I went back to the bathroom, and I managed to lock myself in the bathroom. What did Mom do? They sent Rick back for the rescue. I can only imagine how embarrassed he was as he's holding my hand, dragging me back to the seats covered in cheap airplane bathroom cologne. He was the official photographer on that trip. He took hundreds of photos. I'm certain this is where he develops his love for taking photos. The example I'll use is seeing the beauty in just about anything, as simple as a woman playing a washboard in the streets of New Orleans. Rick was 16 on that trip, and our folks took him to all places in a Parisian nightclub. And I believe it was a burlesque show. 16 years old. Where were they? They didn't do anything like that to me. While Dad was a very talented surgeon, he could not focus those cameras. He managed to take several photos, blurry photos, of Rick on stage with plenty of scantily clad young ladies surrounding him. I'm fairly certain this is where Rick decided he was going to become a plastic surgeon. He saved his laurel wreath, and it was in our room, top shelf. I was the best. We were each other's best mans at our wedding. I was 14 years old. The wedding was right here. I froze giving my speech at the reception. I turned and glanced to Rick, and he gave me this reassuring look. I was put at ease. I finished. Rick's handwriting. Was there anything more beautiful? It wasn't normal. especially in a doctor. How did he have such beautiful handwriting? Maybe this came from the nuns and sisters that taught Ric calligraphy. Mercy, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't he help you addressing your and Stan's wedding invitations? The summer before his freshman year at Northwestern, he was a carpenter apprentice. Brent, are you here? He was mechanically inclined. He told me once that if he hadn't become a doctor, maybe mechanical engineering. He drove that Comet all through high school, 3 in the tree. He put a lift kit on it himself. He changed out the timing belt. He was good with his hands. Each summer, after that, and before med school, he worked at the morgue at Mercy Hospital, local hospital. Unpaid internship, but he'd get $5 for every autopsy. I felt so bad for him. He'd get up at 4:30 in the morning to drive to work every day. Little did I know then that he was already showing me what hard work and perseverance meant. Or the time he took me to my first NU football game. I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. I'm certain I sat with his ATO bros. Commander, were you part of that group that passed me up the stands? No? You sure? I remember feeling so important and so included. That was Ric, always trying to make people feel good. His cats, Dead Tunes, and of course Garcia, his first cat, after Jerry. Concerts that we went to over the years, Wrigley, the Gorge, the Sphere, 2 or 3 times the Sphere. He had mentioned once before he went to over 150 shows. When we would visit in Clarendon Hills, he'd be in his office on Western, tinkering with one thing or another, and inevitably you know he was in there to listen to the music play. His name day on February 7th. I officially took over calling him every February 7th. Birthday twin with my mother. He loved to draw Snoopy. His love of pins. His ties, the colorful ties. I see some of you are wearing them today. He was the only person our miniature French poodle Lily did not bite. How he would eat a piece of American cheese and then smell his fingers. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? How he would never walk barefoot in the grass. And of course, a glass of chocolate milk. Had to be Nestle's Quick. And of course, the pan tostado. Toast to you non-Cubans. I can go on and on and on. The world will definitely be a darker place without Ricardo Izquierdo. May the 4 winds blow you safely home, and let there be songs to fill the air. Ricardito, que Dios te bendiga, mi hermano.
Hi, I'm Ken, Ric's college roommate. For those of you who are looking at the program and saying, I thought Ric's roommate was some guy named Commander, that would be me. Ric and I met before nicknames, and Ric always called me Kenny, and I love that. So Ric's celebration of life continues to Northwestern. Ric moved from living with Mercy and Nate to living with me. Ric and I formed our friendship on day 1, but my next big hurdle was winning over his parents. Ric's mom was quite the mama bear, wanting everything just perfect for Ricky, starting with this roommate, this Jewish kid from Omaha. So my good friends know that I always seem to find a way to charm the moms, and I quickly won the heart of Big Mercy. But the doc was a tougher assignment. So very early fall quarter, Rick took me for the first of what would be many visits to Tuscola. So met the doc. Rick watched as his dad asked me a bunch of questions. Where I grew up, what was I studying at Northwestern? Rick watched with that grin, that gleam in his eye, you know, kind of like the smile Rick had at concerts when he seemed to know which song was coming next. So Rick smiled as the doc said, "Fish vein, let me say you this, young fellow." I thought something really profound was coming. I love the Whoish people. So, going back to Spain and Cuba and Miami, I love your people. Fish vein, you like coffee? Yes, sir. Good. It's time for your first Cuban espresso. On paper, Rick and I were an odd couple as roommates. First, the contributions to the room were very lopsided. Rick brought the mini fridge, the stereo, the telephone, which was a luxury item in those days, a brand new car, the Pontiac Le Mans, license IZQ1. And what did I contribute to the room? A box of my mom's homemade chocolate chip cookies. Rick was very generous in driving us around in that new car, trips to Evanston on cold days to run errands. He drove Dave Bradley to track practice up at Dyke Stadium, and yes, Izzy and Bird had a minute on the NU track team. And that Pontiac shuttled us on road trips to Champaign to experience a typical college town, and Rick took us on his hometown pub crawls. Our academic paths were completely different. Rick was not a casual pre-med. He was 100% all in. There was no question on his path at Northwestern. I was on an econ poli-sci track, and Rick and I actually never took a class together at Northwestern. And Rick and I had the important roommate things in common. We were both very neat. Made our beds, put our clothes away, neatly laid out our books at night for class the next morning. Rick had those big biology, chem, physics books, the notebooks labeled for each lab. The pre-med required Texas Instrument calculator, which was probably the most valuable thing on the desk. And of course, Rick had the sharpened pencils and an assortment of quality pens. We both liked music, but Rick absolutely loved music. So here's a fun fact about Izzy. He had a favorite band before the Grateful Dead. It was REO Speedwagon, the pride and joy of Champaign, Illinois. And he played their albums nonstop, starting with Riding the Storm Out. But REO was quickly pushed aside when Rick's probably first Grateful Dead concert, Northwestern Homecoming 1973, a 4-hour concert at McGaw Hall. Like any college roommate, I have no stories to tell about girlfriends. Other than to say, it took Rick until senior year, when he met Pamela, to finally get it right. Sophomore year, I finally made a key contribution to our living quarters by becoming ATO treasurer and scoring a priority spot in room selection, which took us to the Fishbowl. Well, the Fishbowl was the large corner room, windows on 2 sides, that opened out onto the rooftop. Our room was a gathering place, because Rick got along with everyone, and the door to our room was always open. I remember the scene something like this. Rick on his king-size waterbed, leaning back on his Mamina, the pillow he brought from Cuba, a chemistry book, and a yellow highlighter. I'm on the twin bed above with some econ book, and in would walk the pre-meds. Mickey Meiselman reminding us that he was the smartest guy in ATO. Just ask him, he'll tell you. Fuchs and Shakes all hyped up about the grading curve on the latest organic chemistry test. And there was Izzy, calmly reassuring that it's all going to be okay. And Kevin Callahan would hobble into the room on crutches to steal my mom's chocolate chip cookies. But then the ATO president, our fearless leader, Pat Barron would stroll in and say something like, "Listen up, boys, put the books down. The sorority quads are waiting for us. Let's go south, we're golden." And Rick would burst out laughing, because Pat was the one guy that would always leave Rick laughing. And Pat and Rick would share laughter and music, and wine, and cigars for years to come. Rick was always the best listener to everyone's stories. He was never the storyteller, but he always listened with that smile and gleam in his eye. So after college, Rick and I remained close friends, and he stood up in our wedding. Rick thought it was very cool to wear that white yarmulke, just like the Hooish people. As we went through the pre-ceremony photo session, the photographer was driving Nancy absolutely crazy. And Rick stepped in with that calm, reassuring voice and told Nancy, everything's going to be okay. And it was. We have a great ATO crew here today, friends for over 50 years, who continue to share many special times with Rick. Homecoming games, reunions, Grateful Dead concerts, and winter getaways in Naples. And then there's Tom Carrabba, who shared all of this with Rick, and plus a whole lot more. Tom and Rick sort of grew up together in post-college life, their first homes in Clarendon Hills, and they supported each other as friends, raising kids and trading legal and medical advice. They even shared birthdays. And at the end of those birthdays, proms, sporting events, weddings, vacations, Rick and Tom would probably share a nice bottle of wine, maybe a cigar. Tom would probably tell a few stories. Rick would be the great listener. Tom would probably doze off in his chair. And Rick would smile and soak it all in and say something like, "We're golden, man." In closing, I'm going to borrow a theme that my son Kevin uses when interviewing guests on his podcast. It's the through line. What was the through line from Rick as pre-med freshman to Dr. Ric Izquierdo? What were the things that Rick learned early on, the traits and skills he sharpened that remained important to Rick as a doctor? The through lines. Preparation. Dr. Rick carefully setting up instruments for surgery. You can think about pre-med Rick setting up the textbooks, the TI calculator, and yes, the tie and the pen, these from Rick's personal collection. Attention, staying 100% focused on the surgery plan, calm, decisive, no distractions, no shortcuts, and respect. Rick, the pre-med student, always respected his professors, his fellow classmates, the process, the task ahead, trusting it would all result in success. And a most important through line to Dr. Rick was always respect for his patient, their family, his surgical team, his profession, and above all, respect for the doc and caring for patients for the way his dad did. I recently received an email about Rick from an older ATO, and below his signature was VTL. Well, I hadn't thought about that since our freshman pledge test, where we had to memorize a bunch of ATO chapter stuff. And VTL is the ATO motto: virtue, truth, love. And I think that fits beautifully for Rick. So on behalf of the ATO guys, friends for over 50 years, now with a touch of gray, to Rick, we love you.
I'm Mike Gorey. Rick and I were roommates in medical school. We were 22 years old when we met. Everybody was so young, we didn't even know how young we were. When we were in a first-year medical school lab at the beginning of the year, a professor was handing out microscope slides, and when he got to Rick, he said, "And for you, Ricardo, we have these 3 slides." And we were like, "His name is Ricardo?" I never knew anyone named Ricardo, and I thought that was cool. I liked calling him Ricardo, or Ricardito, which means little Ricardo, as opposed to Big Ricardo, who was his father. I have a lot to be thankful to Rick for. While we lived together, music was a shared passion, and he introduced me to the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Hot Tuna, Jack and Yorma. some of the music you were listening to on the way in today. We played a million games of backgammon, though no matter how good I got, he always seemed to beat me somehow. When we were living together, I was always glad when he went home to Tuscola to visit his family, because that meant he would usually come back with a batch of his mother's black bean soup, which was always awesome and a special treat. Ric was always watching out for me. In 1978, I bought my first new car from a dealership, which was a Volkswagen Rabbit. However, the only one that they had on the lot was a 4-speed manual transmission, and I had never driven a stick shift before. So Ric being Ric, he offered to drive me over to the dealership so I could pick up the car, and he followed me home with his car, just in case I needed his help along the way, because he could drive a stick. P.S. I managed to drive all the way home by myself, or as they say, if you can't find them, grind them. There was another time when Ric and Pamela and my wife Martina and myself were at a Steely Dan concert at the Chicago Theater. Steely Dan was one of my favorite bands, and they played lots of their hits that night. But when they got down to the last few songs, they hadn't played my favorite song, which was Ricky, Don't Lose That Number. So after they finished each of the last few songs, Ric would shout, "Play Ricky!" P.S. They never played it, but not for lack of effort by Ric. This is totally random, but it reminds me of a time I was at a Grateful Dead concert in DeKalb at Northern Illinois University with Ric. There was an NIU student who was sitting in front of us who was totally wasted and spent most of the concert passed out. But every half hour or so, he would sit up and shout, "Play Sugar Magnolia!" P.S. They never played it. You know, it's funny what your brain chooses to remember and chooses to forget. My favorite line in all the novels I've ever read is by the Irish author John Banville, who wrote, "How strange the way they come and go, memories, figments." Another time when Ric was watching out for me was when Martina was going to buy me a surprise 40th birthday present, which was a BMW that I liked. But she wasn't sure whether she should get the 6-cylinder or the 8-cylinder. So she called up Ric to ask him his opinion. And Ric responded by asking her if she wanted me to be happy or to be really happy. Thanks, Ric, for ensuring that I got the 8-cylinder. When Ric and I lived together, he drove a Chrysler Cordoba. If you remember, the television ads for the Cordoba at the time featured Ricardo Montalban, who talked about the soft Corinthian leather of the Cordoba. So every time I was in his car, I would make a point to opine on the soft Corinthian leather, and it got to be a running joke between the two of us. I recently looked up online what years those commercials ran, and I found out that the soft Corinthian leather was just a marketing phrase invented by the advertising agency, and that the leather was actually just standard leather sourced from a New Jersey manufacturer. Ric would be really, really upset if he knew that. Ric and I were both politically conservative and anti-communist. My anti-communism was theoretical, and his was personal. He told me 2 stories that have always stayed with me down through the years. The first involved his father, who was the chief of surgery at his Savannah hospital. He once had to operate on a relative of Fidel Castro. One night at the hospital, he found himself at a table, sitting with Fidel to one side and Che Guevara to the other side. Che was saying that there was going to be a big surprise the next day, and the next day was when they nationalized one of the Cuban industries. The other story was how his family left Cuba for the last time. They were leaving to quote unquote go on vacation with what they could pack in a suitcase. It was obvious that the other families were doing the same thing because there were people throughout the plane as it took off who were crying, knowing that they would never again see their homeland. As I said, my anti-communism was theoretical and his was personal. A little-known factoid about our relationship is that one night, after lifting one too many cold ones, we thought that it would be a good idea to burn our draft cards. By then, the draft was over, but everyone was classified as 1H, which was a holding classification to have if the draft were ever reinstituted. So the cards per se were actually superfluous. So we burned our draft cards together. Not many people can say that, especially among politically conservative anti-communists. Martina and I had dinner with Pamela and Amanda in Florida not long ago, and Pamela reminded me of something that I had completely forgotten about. The very first clinical rotation that Ric and I did in medical school, where we actually go out onto the hospital wards to begin to learn the practice of medicine, was an internal medicine rotation at Cook County Hospital. Pamela reminded me that on that first day, when we were leaving to drive down to Cook County, we were both dressed in a shirt and tie and had our little black doctor bags with us. What we didn't know was that Cook County was a pretty casual place in terms of dress. It was completely casual long before anyone had heard the term Casual Friday. And after that first day, we lost the ties and the doctor bags and stuck with jeans and flannel shirts the rest of the rotation. There's a small group of classmates who get together occasionally for dinner. Ric was a fun part of this group and could always be relied on for a funny line or a good story. He understood the meaning of joie de vivre. I can honestly say that in all the years that I knew Ric, I never saw him once get angry or lose his composure. He was a gentle and kind man, and he was a special friend of mine. I miss him dearly.
I'm Chad Bernstein, husband to Marissa, son-in-law to Ric. When I thought about what I wanted to say today, I kept coming to three areas within life that we both shared: music, medicine, family. These are things I want to celebrate with you all today. I'm not the first, I won't be the last, but the first thing that sticks out to me is music and a way of connecting people. It's a way of connecting people across generations. And it was one of the things that really connected Ric and myself. I really liked the Grateful Dead before I met Marissa and Ric, but I came to love the band as we built and grew our relationship together. We both loved it. I was fascinated by all the concerts he went through throughout the years, as you've heard today, all his old gear, memorabilia, records. Some of my favorite conversations started with a discourse about the band with him. I couldn't get enough about the history and his love specifically for Jerry. And as you heard from Pamela, in this family we name our cats after Grateful Dead members or songs. Some of my favorite memories as a family were with Ric at Dead & Co shows at Wrigley and the Sphere, who a lot of us have been together at those shows. Seeing the joy in his eyes during these with family is something I will never forget, and so happy we got to experience that together. We've talked about this a lot today also, but his profession in medicine. My dad, who is also here today, was a physician in Tampa, Florida, and he dedicated his life to caring for others as a medical professional. I saw the same thing immediately when I met Ric, and what his work meant to him and to others, as I'll talk about today. As Marissa and I met at an ad agency which specialized in pharmaceutical and healthcare, we'd often talk shop with him and Pamela at their house in Clarendon Hills. But I want to celebrate two things today and talk about two stories. Well, I could always call my dad with a medical question, and still do, whether it's for me or my two sons. Ric was always there for the either live or real-time needs. It was mostly from botched kitchen adventures, where I'd put a knife through a finger and have to be rushed out by my wife to drive the car out to his surgery center out in Oak Brook. It was things like that that I knew I could always count on him, whether we were in town or out of town. As you've also heard, Ric was celebrated for his work in the professional community in Chicago. It's pretty apparent the impact he made. One story I want to tell where it really hit home. Our family was out to dinner in Lakeview, in our neighborhood. I saw an old friend with his young family. I went over to say hello. After a few pleasantries, I learned he took over Ric's patients, a lot of Ric's patients that he had out in Clarendon Hills after he retired. When I say he was grateful, it's an extreme understatement. He could not stop talking profusely about how each new patient he had spoke so highly of Ric and the relationships that they built. He made a specific point to me to relay those words to tell Ric and Pamela on his behalf. The third item I want to celebrate, as I mentioned, is family. You've heard it today from Commander and others. On the surface, we also came from different traditions. I was raised Jewish, he was raised Catholic. But he always loved talking about how if you go back far enough, our stories intertwine. He was fascinated by the idea that centuries ago, our families may have come from the same places, the same communities, the same roots, before history sent us down different paths. I remember during our wedding planning, while Pamela may have looked into securing a date at Old St. Pat's for us, Ric was just so pumped that we'd have a priest and a rabbi marrying his daughter. With limited extended family on my own side, being able to join Ric's siblings with Nate and Brenda, Mercy and Stan, their children, and now grandkids near and far, I got to join an incredible group that loved and supported each other. I'm truly grateful that I've been part of that group for the last 17 years or so. What I appreciated most, that Ric never focused on what separated us. He focused on what connected us. Whether it was through music, through caring for others, or through our shared history, he had a way of finding a common ground. And maybe that's what I'll remember the most about him. He reminded us that we're all connected to one another in more ways than we realize. In the Jewish tradition, there's a phrase about someone who has passed, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing. For me, Ric's memory is a blessing. It's the music we shared, the wisdom he offered, and the connections he helped us see. And it's the family and friends gathered here today carrying his legacy forward.
Hi, my name is Natalia. I'm Ric's youngest daughter, and I'm up here today with my older sisters, Marissa and Amanda. Today, we'd like to share a few words about the most important man in our lives, our Papi. When we think about what Papi instilled in us as girls, one lesson stands above all others. Remember who you are. He said it when we faced challenges or came up short. He said it when we achieved something meaningful, reminding us to stay humble. And he said it as we walked out the door as teenagers, trusting us to make good decisions. It was a simple phrase, but it stayed with me. The lesson he was quietly teaching us still guides me today. And even at the end of his life, when there was so much that he could no longer remember, he never lost sight of who he was. He remained true to the values he spent a lifetime teaching us. Each of us will share a memory that reflects that lesson and brings it to life. For me, that lesson is best reflected in the way Papi persevered. Whether he knew it or not, perseverance was woven into who he was. From leaving his country as a young boy to chasing his dream of becoming a surgeon and protecting that dream through countless obstacles and setbacks, he kept moving forward. And he never pretended that adversity didn't affect him. He didn't hide his frustration or disappointment. Instead, he shared them honestly, worked through it, and he kept going. He taught us that perseverance isn't the absence of struggling. It's about digging deep, remembering who you are, and finding the strength to move forward. That is how he lived. And when he was diagnosed, our family came together to help him pursue some of the things that brought him the greatest joy.
I'm Amanda, the middle daughter. Thank you all for being here. I remember my dad as someone who was very purposeful with his words. It was as if he was holding a thoughtfulness for the world, taking in what was around him and speaking when words were truly needed and not just to fill space. Perhaps that was a function of living with 4 women, but in any case, his presence always filled the room he was in. I can still hear his laugh while I was supposed to be asleep when my parents were having their BST dinner parties with the Wrights and the Carrabas. He always egged on the chusmeria going on when he got home from the office at the end of the day, and that continued with his grandchildren. But for the most part, it was very easy to be with him in a comfortable togetherness, little talking, just being. And in this quiet thoughtfulness, music he introduced me to was a huge part of my childhood, which you've heard many times today already. For example, we have a very specific flamenco guitar Christmas album we would listen to and still do every year on the morning of December 25th. And after our family went to Spain for 2 weeks in the early 2000s, my dad created a slideshow with photos of our adventure set to an almost Game of Thrones music. I can still hear it. Of course, a lot of times, the Grateful Dead would be playing at our house. An immigrant and a skilled and respected surgeon, he may seem like an unlikely deadhead, but they are the soundtrack to almost all of my memories as a kid. They are Saturday morning drives with my dad, windows down, to the car wash, falling asleep to the songs in the back seat while he drove home from a day spent at my Aunt Mercy and Uncle Stan's in the north suburbs. Lazy Sundays when Jerry and Bobby's voices would float out of my dad's study as he hummed along. I've known the songs my whole life without even realizing it. I didn't start listening to the Grateful Dead on my own until about 10 years ago. But I was pleasantly surprised when at my first Dead & Co show at Wrigley Field, I somehow knew all the songs. And going to Dead & Co shows with my dad brought a lot of joy and peace to our whole family, especially in the last several years. As you've heard, we traveled to the Gorge 3 years ago for the most beautiful and the hottest sunset concert I've ever been to. I think it was over 100 degrees. He made it to the Sphere twice to see them, and he had this uncanny ability to hear just 1 or 2 chords at the beginning of a new song and immediately know what they were about to play. He also had this calm come over him at shows. I think now I see that music for him was a way to express himself when words simply couldn't encompass everything. When I listen to music that really moves me, and especially when I hear the Grateful Dead, I think of my papi, and I remember who I am. If I've learned anything from my dad's love of music, it's that sometimes music does the talking for you.
I'm Marissa, I'm the oldest daughter. And while many of you have talked about it, and Amanda shared that our dad had an undeniable lifelong passion for music, nothing gave him more joy than his family. He was a hardworking surgeon. He carried an immense weight of a demanding profession. He was home every single night for dinner. I can still picture him walking through the garage door in Clarendon Hills, leaving the stress of the hospital and his office behind, always carrying a smile and a kiss for our mom. And now that I'm a working parent myself, I truly recognize the depth and unwavering commitment. I understand what it takes to show up the way he did. And despite the grueling hours of his medical career, he never missed a beat for us. He was there for every single one of my swim meets in that hot, hot natatorium. He came to all of my sister's track meets. He was a quiet yet fiercely proud supporter of our passions. He loved nothing more than to have all 3 of us under one roof. And we always knew how excited he was to have us home because without fail, he would fly our college flags across the garage door the moment we arrived home from school breaks. The profound depth of his love and the deliberate way he chose to show up for us every single day has shaped exactly who I want to be as a mom, a wife, and a sister. Remember who you are might seem like a bit of an ironic message for us to share today given his diagnosis, But the truth is, that is exactly how our dad lived his life till the very end. He never lost sight of his core. He stayed entirely true to his most important values. He never gave up. He told our mom he loved her every single day up until the end. And he found absolutely peace in the simple, quiet moments with his family. These are lessons that our family will carry forward, and we will instill these values in future Izquierdo generations to come.
My name is Tom Hamilton, husband of Natalia, Ric's youngest daughter, and also his son-in-law. The first time I went to a Grateful Dead concert, I left early. I went because John Mayer was touring with them. Little did I know they would not be playing Your Body is a Wonderland. And just a small anecdote, which is not in my speech, I just remembered the first night that Natty and I went on a date. She was actually going to a Dead concert at Wrigley. So, serendipitous. Tie-dye, hippies, a vibe I didn't yet understand. After a few songs and a few beers, I left. And today, I would give a lot to teleport back to that concert, and I would most certainly stay until the end. I joined this family later than most of you. For most, your threads run much longer than mine. Though the fraction of Ric that I knew was enough to change me. I'd like to tell you what he taught me and where I think he is. There's a song the Dead wrote called Ripple. Robert Hunter wrote the lyrics, and it reads like a psalm. Reach out your hand if your cup be empty. If your cup is full, may it be again. Let it be known there is a fountain that was not made by the hands of men. Long before Robert Hunter, King David wrote about a fountain that overflows in Psalm 23. An abridged version reads as follows. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. My cup overflows. Both of these emphasize that a life well lived is not measured by what you keep. When a cup is full, it overflows. And Ric, his cup overflowed. Not because of what he had, but because of how he was. Where the rest of us filled silence, Ric waited for the next beat. When he spoke, his words had purpose. He loved taking in the rhythm of the waves of the beach. He combed his mustache. He hummed happy tunes, and he'd raise a finger when something mattered. He loved Pamela, his girls, his grandkids, his cats, his Cuban heritage, and a good glass of red wine. From what I know of him, he would likely be embarrassed by all of this, but he would also quietly be touched. You'll note Psalm 23 doesn't skip the valley, it walks straight through it. And Ric walked his valleys. He left Cuba as a boy, he rebuilt a medical practice late in his career, and he walked his final road with the same quiet dignity he carried through everything else. What I learned from watching him is that some things in a person don't depend on memory. The mannerisms, the music, the way he'd bob his head when a song moved him, those stayed. But underneath those was something deeper, his soul. Psalm 23 notes, he restores my soul. The soul is what God breathes into us and what returns to him. That is the promise. Not that the body will be spared, not that the mind will hold, that the deepest part of a person is held by God all along and held by God at the end. I want to thank Ric. He has brought me closer to God, and he continues to. I'm a better man and a more faithful one because of a father-in-law I knew for far too short of a time. Ripple ends with a line. If I knew the way, I would take you home. While we are here, we have each other. We are meant to be companions on this road. to help one another get closer to God, to love each other well, and to walk each other home as far as we are able. Ric has walked his final road, and I believe that everything in me that he is home. The humble man who waited for the next beat, who let others speak first, who never needed to be the loudest voice, is exactly where he should be. Ric has reached the still water, and his life will ripple through ours. Thank you very much.
Listen to the river sing sweet songs to rock my soul.